Were you a fan of wrestling growing up?
I have to say absolutely. I said all the years going by, uh, you know, I've been in the business now 20 years. I started young. I started about a year out of school. And I can honestly say probably since maybe 5, 6 years old, I can remember watching it on television. And when other kids were saying they were going to be doctors and lawyers, I can honestly say that I wanted to be a professional wrestler, which I think is, I mean, it's in my blood, always be in my blood, always be in my system. I've met a lot of wrestlers that came and went that got into wrestling because it was for the financial reasons or for the glamour or anything else, certain things like that. I says, I wanted to do wrestling. Besides that, whatever came of it. You wanted to reach your goals. And, I can honestly say I wanted to do it since I was a little kid. Just always stayed with it. I figured it would grow out of me, and it never grew out of me. It just stayed in and just kept growing and growing.
Was there anyone that you were a fan of that you liked watching?
Absolutely. I think growing up as a kid, when it was, you were definitely, you had to cheer the baby faces and boo the heels. Bruno Sammartino, being, full Italian descent, was always my idol, and, with my father and myself. It's kind of cool because back then, around the, I started in 90, I started in 85, but then earlier, in the 80s, late 70s, nobody was allowed to cheer for the heels. It wasn't even considered, it wasn't even thought of, like the way wrestling has evolved. But superstar Billy Graham was unbelievable. I appreciate his work more and more as I get older. They were the top two because it was Bruno's main heel nemesis, opponent, beat him for the belt and everything else. But I can say those two definitely left an impression, and it was cool because Graham was years and years before his time. I mean, his book came out, and it just says 20 years too soon exactly what it was. He came out, he broke tradition. He just his build and everything else. He was just way before his time. And I mean, your typical guys growing up, everybody, when it got to the Hogan era, it was more or less like, it was more of a fad. With the rock and wrestling and everything else. As I got older, I start looking at those. I started, like I said, once I had my first match, 85, you start looking at these guys as peers and not so much idols. I mean, there were other guys that I loved their work, like, that I branded myself kind of after in my younger days, like Rick Martel, guys like Tito Santana, guys like that, that definitely left a mark with me. But Bruno was definitely my idol, and it's always a pleasure when I get to see him on the circuit.
What were you doing before you broke into the wrestling business?
You know what it was at that age, 18, 19, pretty much a year out of high school. I worked with a family business, my father's business. But I mean, it was there. It was a business that wrestling was. It was in the works. It was something that you knew what you wanted to do. You knew you were going to do it, how you were going to do it. I just felt like at that time I was still too young. I mean, now, we have a show tonight. There's high school kids that are professional wrestling. I wouldn't even thought of it back then, but I was lucky to start a year out of school, and that was just my main thing. That was your stages where you're just starting to grow and learn, and I wouldn't change it any other way. I would have done it any different.
Now, how did you break into the wrestling business?
How I broke in, back then there wasn't any schools, very, very seldom. The only school that was there was the Monster Factory, Larry Sharp's school. And that was too far. I got to know of a guy, independent guy in my area, was named King Kalua. And I knew of him, didn't know really how much he wrestled, where he wrestled. And then, I got to meet up with him, and I ended up joining the same gym that he belonged. And really, it was just tagging along with him. He was one of the more popular and busy independent wrestlers. And it was more on the job training for my first couple of years because of, no schools. Now, wrestling has changed so much just for that reason, because now kids can go to these schools, and there's schools on every corner. They can get ring time. There's plenty of schools with rings set up. I mean, for me, it was just a matter of on the job. Maybe we can go to a show a little bit early. Most of the stuff was just learned in the backyard. I didn't really start to feel good about it until I went to Memphis and for Jerry Lawler. I want to say it was 88, 87, 88 around those years when I started. When you can wrestle 6 days a week is when you really start feeling good about yourself.
Do you notice a difference between the way you were brought in, I guess, trained to the way kids are brought in and trained now?
Yeah, I briefly touched on it. It's exactly what it is. Now there is a school on every corner, but it does have its downfalls because of supply and demand. Now you could pump out a lot of good wrestlers. I mean, everybody can do the moves. Back then, guys weren't as skilled. I mean, if you were skilled a little bit, you definitely stood out. I mean, I remember my first bunch of years in the business, the magazines that were hot on you and everything else, do a lot of pinups and a lot of articles because they're always looking for the up and comer. Okay. Now there's a lot of up and comers, but there's very few shows. There's very few places to wrestle. I mean, before there were territories. I mean, like I said, just when I got to go to Memphis for a year and went to Puerto Rico for a year, and just the fact when you can wrestle for 5 to 7 days a week is unbelievable just for that reason. For that reason of constant repetition. Now your repetition comes into school. But the problem that I see is you don't get a chance to work in front of a crowd. I see young guys wrestle now and they do all the moves, but they don't bring the crowd into play. They're like they're performing in front of a gym, in front of the other school students and, the people they train with, and that's it. That's it.
Memories of your first match? Who's it with?
Newark, New Jersey, September 14th, 1985. It was a Puerto Rican Mexican type outfit. I was scared to death. I wasn't trained where I wanted. It was learning on the job. It was like everybody was Spanish there. I went up with a local wrestling, Larry Winters, and the ring announcer, and Gypsy Joe Rodriguez, which was a longtime WWF undercard guy. It was my first match. Nothing that I remember about the match besides the fact that it was, you never forget your first, like they say, no matter what it is. And again, you'll always remember it. I remember more my second match the same night. They were doing TV tapings for this Hispanic television. And the guys in the match were, there's a thing where guys would blade each other. And I was scared to death. These two guys, everybody, it was Puño Dinero and I forget his partner, they would cut the other guys. And I remember the match before mine, or the hour before, they bladed the guy and he was going ballistic in the locker room. So I'm saying to myself, then as they put up the sheet for the second hour, and I see my name against these two guys, I was scared to death. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I said, it's my first show of my life. And these guys are gonna blade me. And they're just scared to death. I work with these guys. Every time he punched me in the head, I was doing this. I'm like, Jesus Christ Almighty. And it never happened. I'm thinking, I never said so many prayers in my life in one day. It was just one of those things where, you're just so caught up in the moment, so caught up in that first show, your first matches. And I'm thinking, this is going to end before it ever starts. I'm not going to wrestle again. It's going to be my last match. But it's just one of those things where, again, it's just a lifetime worth of memories. You could tell a story about every match almost. Every setting, everything like that. So,
were you always into physical fitness?
I just thought at that era, you were more concerned about your appearance. Okay, you were more concerned about it was big again growing up, and then once I got into business, so you're looking at the mid '80s WWF, you're looking at the Hulk Hogan era for the most part. Steroids were, that's when they had the big steroid expose and the Warlord and the Barbarian, all those type of guys. Right. Heavy steroid use, but that's the one thing never could get involved in, just because I think personally the gym that we worked out in was a clean gym. There was other hardcore gyms, but it was just one of those things where I've always been a big kid, and I just said, a little bit of training, a little bit of working out, and feel good about it. Now, I think it might have hurt me down the road, like when I was in WWF, where everybody was heavy into this stuff. And I said, you know what? I felt good about how I looked. I said, if maybe somebody came to me and they said, okay, we want you to look a little sharper. We're going to give you a better push or something like that, which never happened. I mean, there's things that happened. That never happened. It was just one of those things where they're going to say, if they would have said, well, we're going to make you an intercontinental champ. We want you to get on a little bit of juice or this or that. Again, you're only going to do this one time in your life. Take a chance. You know, you take a chance, which never happened. Because I always felt like I really trained hard, good metabolism, always kept a good build. It was good enough for what I was doing at the time. So, I mean, I felt good. I look back on tapes, and it's funny, between WCW and WWF, you say, hey, you know what? The guys that were better than you, bigger than you or whatever, weren't necessarily, not that they were getting better pushes at the time. It's definitely, today's business is a step above what it was in the 80s and 90s when it comes to like steroid use and abuse.
Gotcha. What was the biggest misconception you had about the business before you got in and started working in it?
I was always told that you had to, Gorilla Monsoon wrote an article in the Philadelphia Daily News, and he always said you had to be an amateur wrestler. You had to be to get into professional, which was not true. So I joined the high school wrestling team, which I had totally no interest in. I ended up feeling good at it, but it was total bullshit. It was like one of those things where, you trained your ass off. I did it sophomore, junior, senior year. And again, when I ended up winning the Catholic League title as a senior, and it was just, it taught you how to be, again, determination, and taught you how to be just be real strict in training and dedicated, just things like that, to where if I didn't play that sport, if I didn't wrestle, again, it had nothing to do with professional until I got there. I found out that was the case. It was just a point of learning how to be dedicated, training hard, best shape of my life, with all the cardio and all the exercise and everything else that you do on a wrestling team. But that was a biggest misconception going in. I mean, other than that, it was pretty much, obviously you learn once you get in there. Circumstances, you learn there's so much politics and nepotism and everything else. And it was just all matter, just like a learning experience when it comes to that. But, I can touch on that on other instances too. Yeah. So,
did you have any mentors early on?
From wrestling?
Yeah.
Probably just the same. I mean, same as type guys that I looked up to. Again, Mike Kahlua was definitely a mentor because I saw him in the business. Mike is a guy that's a little known. If you're a wrestling fan, you know him, but he's always been an independent wrestler. Mike's always had a real job, so to speak, college graduate. He could wrestle with anybody. I mean, he's been on the stage, he did AWF tapings when they taped at the Tropicana in Atlantic City. He wrestled all their top guys. Mike could have legitimately been a star if he would have given up his family and his regular job, which he chose not to do. It's one of those things where he made good connections. He was real close with Sergeant Slaughter. But again, it was one of those things where it was his timing. It wasn't right for him. He never wanted to. He toyed with it. And I think if somebody knocked his door down about a nice contract or a job in the big time, he would have thought about it. But Mike was definitely a mentor just because being the fact that he broke me in. And besides him, the couple of the guys I said I looked up to, you always, you always have that respect for those guys and for the fact that, what they meant to you. So I'm here because of this person, this person, and this person. And that's really what it came down to.
What were your goals when you first got into the business?
Goals, I think, were like everybody else that wants, that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed type of kid. Right. To where, you let the cosmetic things in the business come out, like the belts, the championships, the glory, this, that, and this. I mean, what I've come to understand is, unlike other sports, the best wrestlers don't necessarily get the best usage. And you could name a dozen wrestlers where you're saying, this guy was a great wrestler, but he was never a big star. This guy was a great wrestler, he was never a big star. But, they have the roles in the business. That was the one thing. It was just, again, it was trying to think, when it comes to that, you saw, again, I want to reiterate the fact, again, with the nepotism, with the politics, with the fact that you couldn't, again, it's fake.
Right.
It's one of those things. It's set up, it's staged, it's pre-planned, it's all that. I mean, this is the type of thing, those words were never mentioned ever on film 20 years ago, okay? Now, it's sports entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a given. Everybody knows it. If you don't know it, then you've been hiding under a rock.
Right.
It's just one of those things, again, it's the point of the best guys don't always get the best pushes. Again, whose father's a promoter, whose brother's this, and whose brother's that. Again, it's just that's just one big part of it. The part that will never change.
Well, was it frustrating early on when you first got into wrestling?
I was lucky from where I was between my first 5 years to where guys are their first 5 years now. What a difference! Because I rode Mike's coattails. Mike was in with all the promoters.
Right.
Okay. Mike was in with the promoters to the point of there wasn't schools that were pumping guys out. I mean, we'd see guys on these shows that were horrible, and you look around, you'd say, "Christ, I've been training 6 months. I'm better than this guy, and this guy." Then they look at you. My thing was, if the promoter gave me a chance, he looked at me. It was up to me to have him book me again. And again and again. And that was the best part because everybody knew that I used to wrestle Mike all the time. It was like the big feud of the East Coast. And it was good because, we had our match. We could always work together good. And word travels. Promoters start using it. Other promoters start using it. That's why it wasn't frustrating to the point of now, again, there's so many guys trying to get on the show. And they're working for nothing. They're working for free. They're working for 25 hours. Back then, you filled a slot. And I remember, Christ, $100, $125. It didn't matter who you were or how long you were in the business. If the promoter wanted to use you, you filled a slot. And that slot paid a certain amount of money. That's why it was great my first few years until I was able to get a little bit of exposure and then move on to the different federations because of that. Now, I don't know how long, if I was just starting out, I don't know how long I could stay with it because you're losing money every night. All you can hope for is you get your name on the internet. Some people start reading your name. You become a hot indie name. That's all you can, because the money, you got to live with your parents. Mm-hmm. And obviously everybody's got to have a regular job just for that reason because of the fact that there's no money to be made. No money at all. And again, I'm happy about that. It kept me making money. It kept me started. I mean, I made money in this business for 20 years. I never had to take a step back, which is good. Yeah. It keeps your interest in it. That's the main thing.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.